last did you experience a wisdom shift? It takes the wise to rise. Wisdom is needed to achieve distinction in your workplace, family life, business, and relationship with your creator. Join Osir Wisdom, a consultant on leadership, entrepreneurship, and relationships, as he teaches on practical wisdom to help you take the lead in life. You will experience a shift.
Shifting your mindset, shifting your life.
Hallelujah. All right, so last week we began the new series on the authority of the believer in the first service. And last week, Pastor Favor that took it laid a very strong foundation, talking about the fact, she mentioned about three things. Number one, that we have been translated. Because if you do not know that the source of your authority, you might, not manifest that authority in the fullness. So first of all, we learned Colossians chapter 1 and verse number 13, from 11 actually to about 13, that Christ has moved us from a kingdom of darkness into the kingdom of his dear son. That mental understanding, that picture is vital for you to capture that there is a movement that has happened. Number two, she also mentioned that it's important to know that because we have moved from the kingdom of darkness into the kingdom of his dear son, therefore we have this awesome privilege. Because when you move into that kingdom, you are trying to look like the king in that kingdom. And so Jesus, who is the king in that kingdom, is in a certain way. And so our job is to not look like the person in that kingdom. And Bible actually says in Peter that now as he is, so are we. And that's marvelous. So if you want to look at how you ought to be when you fully manifest, you look at Jesus. If you do not know who you should look like, study the Bible. Study the book of John, Matthew, Luke, and you see how Jesus is. And suddenly you know how you ought to look. And so, those three things she mentioned were powerful. So I'll lay more foundation on that. In Matthew 28 and verse 18, Jesus said something that was very powerful, and I want you to capture this. And I'm going to go in this teaching in a little different dimension. Matthew chapter 28 and verse 18. If you can have it on the screen, that will be helpful. So Jesus came to them and said, look at this, look at this. This is not a reported speech. Jesus speaking. What did he say? All authority has been given unto me in heaven and on earth. In other places he say all powers. But all authority, not some authority. That claim is a very huge claim. All power given to me. So if all powers, let's assume there are 20 powers, and Jesus have received all the 20. Are there other powers left that he did not receive? When you begin to break it down like this, it helps you. He said, all powers has been given to me. Now look at this. Then in Luke chapter 10 and verse 19 and other places, Jesus now said, all this power that has been given to me, he said, now I give to you. All the powers that Jesus had received, he said, now I give to you. Behold, I give unto you power. And then he began to mention some of the powers, because he said all powers. So the next few weeks, as you can know in the series, we're going to be taking few of those powers to break them down. So he said, behold, I give you power. So there's a power to tread upon serpent. There's a power to tread upon scorpion. There's a power over all the other powers of the enemy. And there are different kinds of power. So there's a power to pray for the sick and believe for them to be healed. There's a power for you to trust God that when you say something, it will be things that God has spoken to you in terms of word of knowledge. There is power for you to resist temptation. There is power for you to love. There is power to obey. I don't know if you're catching what I'm saying. So Jesus said, all this power has been given to me, and I give you all of this power. And so I'm going to try to break down a little, maybe like 2 or 3 of them today, the power that Jesus received and how it's important that all this power, because if you're not careful, you think that all these powers are all power of execution. That is power I receive to do something. There's also power that you can receive to become something. There's a power that you need to receive to become something, and it's that becoming that helps you to do. So in John chapter 3, Jesus told Nicodemus, he said, you must be born again. Also in John chapter 1 and verse 12, he says, to them that believe in me, I gave the power to become. I wanted to see that it's not just one power he's talking about. There are different types of power. Look at that. It says, but as many as receive him, and those he gave the power to become. So I'm going to be talking about the Jesus power of becoming. There are powers to become something. That means anything you want to become, Jesus said there are different kinds of power. He said, all authority, all powers, I have them. So if you want to, before you want to do, because people's mind, once you hear the believer's authority, the first thing you think that comes to their mind is, I have power to heal the sick. I have power to do this one, and which is very powerful and it's important. But you also need to think and understand that there's a power to become. And I'm going to take about 2 or 3 of those powers that help Jesus become. Number 1, the power of obedience. Jesus demonstrated obedience in a very amazing way. To the time the Father says, this is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased. He obeyed the Father, and in Philippians chapter 2, it says he did not count all of these things robbery, that him and his Father shared the same authority and powers, but he laid down and became humble. He became humble. The moment he became that, it was easier for him, to show this power of obedience. It says, I'm being formed in the fashion of a man. In fact, if you can go back like 7 or 6, that can help us understand better. Please, I want to catch what I'm saying. That all this power we're talking about, there are powers that can help somebody become. And we are coming from that dimension. So you say, I'm being formed or fashioned as a man. He humbled himself and became obedient unto death, even the death on the cross. Look at this. So the power that Jesus began his journey is the journey of obedience. Before Jesus began to open the eye of blind people, before he began to raise the dead, he captured the power to be obedient, because the power source from where he's going to get it from, he needs to remain connected in obedience to that power to know when to use it and when not to use it. If they can give you authority and you can overdo. So at a point, the disciples of Jesus said, Father, let us curse these people. Let them die. Jesus said, you don't know the spirit from which you are. You don't have the spirit that you have. There is, when you have power, you can do and undo. Is that not correct? But you have to, for you to understand the power of a believer, you must understand that believer must first of all, before you go outwardly to do things, you must understand the power of internal obedience. So Jesus became obedient to death. In other words, he was so obedient to the Father that if the Father said die, he would die. And obviously you saw what he did. So when the Father says that you are going to drink this cup, at a point, I'm sure you know that Jesus did not die just by sacrifice alone. Sacrifice is an act of will. Obedience is an abdication of your will. That means Jesus got to a point, he says, it's not my will, but your will. Okay? He was not dying because it was his will. He was dying because it's the will of the Father for him to die. So the first point is, am I an obedient person? If God suddenly helps you that you pray for people and I have headache and they go, wouldn't you open a headache consultation ministries? Because that power of obedience is important, because you have to still obey the source of the power. I'm sure this is not a very regular aspect of power that people talk about, but this is power in its most refined format. So Jesus was obedient, and because he was obedient, when he now speaks to other things had to obey him. Because he could obey the Father, when he now speaks to fig trees ought to obey him. Because he's obedient, because he has sown the seed of obedience, now when he speaks to blind eyes, when he speaks to lame legs, when he speaks to other situations, they had to obey him, because himself, he's walking in obedience to the Father. You know, the army will say, obey the last word. So in the army, the very first thing, and the army talks about power and authority, the very first basic is you have to be an obedient person. So if you're going to walk in the authority of the believer, you must understand the power of obedience. If you are thinking that you know more than the God that gave you power, or if it's at home, you are thinking you know more than your mother that gave you power to do something, or you are thinking that you know more than your boss in the office, you have already disobeyed the law of the power of obedience. Obedience is so key for you to express any power. So in Luke chapter 7, the centurion man was talking. He said, Jesus, I'm a man under authority. Because I'm a man under authority, that means if my boss asks me to do this, I will do it. So that also gave me power. Now, if I ask other people to do, they will do. But some don't want to obey what someone higher than them have told them, and they want other people to obey them. That power is so, he said, for I am also a man set under authority, having under me soldiers. You see that? So he's under authority, and so now, because he's there, he said, I said to one, go, and he goeth. And I said to one, come, and he cometh. If he was not obedient, in fact, after a while, they take him out of that position. It was his obedience that helped him to be able to exercise that authority. So Jesus established that. In fact, in John chapter 2, the very first miracle Jesus did, that is in verse 5. John 2:5. The mother of Jesus was teaching the disciples the first thing I believe she has learned from Jesus. He says, his mother said to them, whatever he asks you to do, say unto you, you should just do what? To obey. Part of the reasons why some people can't express the power of God is that what the Holy Ghost is asking you to do, you have not obeyed. What your unit leader is asking you to do, you have not obeyed. What your pastors are asking you to do, you have not obeyed. The moment you are living in disobedience, you have also lost the power and the right, the requirement to exercise spiritual authority. Obedience is the purchasing power for spiritual authority. Obedience. You have to, in the Old Testament, we saw people that displayed God's grace and power in an unusual way. One of them is Moses. I'm told that, you can see in the Bible, that Moses is the meekest man. So anything God asks him to do, he will do. Do you think it's easy for him to ask you to remove his sandals and he removes? If I ask you now to remove your sandals and walk from here to Atlanta, will you do it? But Moses pulled it out. Moses, they asked him to go back to where he left. Of course, if you remember, Moses ran away from Egypt. Now they are asking him to go back to Egypt. That's not his desire. That's not what he wanted to do. If you are going to exercise power, you need to stop doing only what you want to do. You have to get used to doing something that you are instructed to do, whether you like it or not. Do you think it was easy for Jesus to be led into the wilderness for fasting and prayer for 40 days? Or when Moses brought the what's it called? The table, 10 commandments, and got angry the first one and broke it. What did God say you should do? Say you should go back. This time around, the first one, I wrote it with my own finger. This time, in the midst of fasting, you'll be the one writing it. So when you now think that the only power that Moses had was for Moses to look at the river and said, and lifted up his rod, and the sea parted. No, that is the demonstration. The power source, the exercise, the rehearsal is in the obedience. The secret obedience he has been obeying. So when he said, speak to the rock, whether he spoke or he decided to hit it, it's what he has done in the secret. So I'm telling you that the first thing you want to know if you are going to be exercising this power is the power and the value of obedience.
Shifting your mindset, shifting your life.
I believe your experience is shit. Join us at the Wisdom Place. For details, follow us at wisdom_shift and at Osiri Wisdom on Twitter and on Facebook. Or you can call us on this number 0803-374-3339. 0803-374-3339. Shifting your mindset, shifting your life. You will experience a shift.